If you're a fan of the U.S. men's national team or just a fan of football in general, I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments as to whether or not I'm crazy. I've had people on my channel asking me, hey, you haven't done a USMNT video in a long time, or hey, you haven't put out a reaction to Gregg Berhalter being hired as the new manager of the U.S. men's national team. So that's what we're doing today. But I think it'll become pretty clear why I haven't done that. I'm calling this video a list of convenient excuses as we lose a year of team building. I don't know if that's even going to fit in the title, or I guess down there, the title in the YouTube video, but we'll roll with it for now. In my opinion, U.S. soccer has wasted actually a little more than one, let's just round down and call it one of 4.5 years leading up to the next World Cup. And it's only 4.5 years because it's in the Middle East and it's in November, so you get that extra couple months to prepare. And they've wasted that year doing absolutely nothing to instill confidence in fans that they will get U.S. soccer back on track and therefore the U.S. men's national team back on track. And it's been so discouraging that I haven't wanted to do a video. That's pretty much what it comes down to. It's just a dumpster fire. I don't want to just constantly talk about a dumpster fire, but we'll do it today as we've finally come to a resolution as to who we're going to hire. But let's talk about this list of convenient excuses. First, Bruce resigns after we fail to qualify in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so I'm Sunil Gulati, but I'm not resigning. Oh, wow. Wow, lots of people are mad. Okay. I won't run for re-election. But, we should not hire a coach until we've elected a new president. By itself, makes sense. New president is elected, who makes a convenient campaign promise to install general managers over the men's and women's national teams, and they would be in charge of the coaches. So you can't hire a coach without the GM being hired, because the GM, it's just like in other sports. If you got rid of your GM and then you hired a coach, the new GM would be like, well, I don't want that coach. So, but of course, since that was a campaign promise, you'd think he had somebody in mind for the GM spot that could start pretty soon. But instead, we have to start a search for that, so it's official. And that GM that we find can't start until August, apparently, for some odd reason. Well, that's okay, because it'll be after the World Cup. So then we can see who's available. Makes sense. In isolation. And it's also okay because we're really just focused on the 2026, North America World Cup bid. And so instead of doing anything about the men's national team, we'll just leave them listless. With Dave Sarachan continually, hey, we're going to extend Dave for another 3 days. Okay, Dave, you did, let's extend him for another week. Let's just keep extending Dave Sarachan and just tell him, don't have a concrete plan. Don't try and install any specific tactics. Don't use anything that Tab Ramos uses at the U13 through U20 ranks. Let's just call up some youngsters and play some big opponents and just have no plan. Okay. But we're focused on the World Cup bid. Makes sense in isolation, right? Okay, so the GM started, and wow. Apparently he's put no thought into who he'd even want to interview or hire. He's not made, he's not worked any nights. He's not done his day job with the Philadelphia Union during the day, and then at night, started doing some unofficial calling, but official because, hey, everyone knows I've got this job starting on August 1st, and hey, would you be interested? And doesn't do that. It's going to be a long, drawn out process, but I'm also, as Ernie Stewart, going to essentially stay silent about that process. So things will leak out that I don't have control over. We're only interviewing one candidate, and that will only hire someone who speaks perfect English. But don't worry, we'll realize how bad that sounded because it was probably true. And so in the press conference, when we announce the new coach, we'll say, oh, it wasn't about speaking perfect English. It was about communication skills. And, being able to speak multiple languages is a plus, even though, we're just going to walk back that statement. So then we have to wait for the GM to go through the interview process and hire somebody. So that's a really convenient excuse, right? That makes sense in isolation. Okay, we found our guy, but we're not going to tell anyone, even though it's the worst kept secret in U.S. soccer history. We'll say you should expect the hire about this date over here, which is when we're expecting this coach's team to be out of the MLS playoffs, but they went further. No, like what we really meant was we'll have something in place by the end of the year. It's definitely not Gregg Berhalter, I promise. It's just a really weird coincidence that the Columbus Crew did better than we expected in the MLS playoffs, and the date that we put out through the media that you should expect to hire has now been pushed back 6 weeks. Oh, and it's also just a coincidence that Gregg Berhalter's brother is the chief operating officer and likely future CEO of US Soccer. I mean, all of this makes logical sense in isolation. Every excuse makes sense in isolation. Sunil Gulati's not going to be president. You wait to a new president to install a coach. Well, the guy that gets elected then says, let's have a general manager. Well, we got to find a general manager. And that takes an eternity to get someone to actually start. And then that guy has to do his search. And so you take something that could have been done in 2-3 months, and you've extended it to 14 months, and at the same time done nothing to say, hey, we're sorry to your fans or anything like that. So again, those excuses to me make sense in isolation, but what doesn't make sense at all to me, and what is indicative of the continued failure of US Soccer, is that there was no cohesive, oh shoot, we need another manager plan. They didn't have, like, in a desk drawer pulled away, Bruce Arena has retired for health reasons, or he's taking a job in Europe, or he's just decided this isn't for him, or, oh, we didn't qualify. We didn't have a plan to pull out of the desk drawer to go, like, in case of emergency, do these things. So imagine running a nonprofit, and one of your key director level roles, like the one that's in charge of all the volunteers that are actually doing the work of the nonprofit. Imagine that role is empty for 14 months because there's no plan. Your volunteers are running around with no direction. What would you think of that nonprofit? So let's continue that analogy. US Soccer Federation has said Jay Berhalter has had nothing to do with the hiring of his brother, Gregg Berhalter. Well, what have they done to make you believe anything they've said? They've said, oh, he's on the business side. Okay, sure. And the business side approved the hiring of Ernie Stewart, right? So he hired the guy who hired his brother. He's slated to be the next CEO of US Soccer. You're telling me he had zero influence on any of this? Really? How gullible do you think we are? Imagine running a nonprofit, or the activity of the nonprofit, like the good that the nonprofit is doing, is completely isolated from the people running the business side. Like, they don't even talk. They've never had a meeting. There are people who run the business and, like, manage the money, and there's people who actually do the work. And they've never sat down in a boardroom and had a conversation. Is that realistic? You're saying they don't chat about these things in the hallway, even off the record? It's not part of any formal board meeting, minutes or anything like that? Give me a break. So contrast this to American college football athletic directors. The good ones, essentially, athletic directors are essentially running multi-million-dollar nonprofits, right? Some of these programs are generating 50 million, 60 million, 100 million. I want to say it's like 100 million in revenue for, like, some of the big programs like Alabama and Texas. Millions of dollars. It doesn't matter what really the amount is. They are essentially running multi-million-dollar nonprofits. Any good athletic director has a list in their desk drawer, a constantly changing list of who they would reach out to, who they would interview, and so on if their coach either does a bad job and has to be fired, or is poached by another team with a better offer. They have a plan in place. US Soccer had no plan in place. The other thing that's extremely frustrating is they've read the room really poorly. They've acted like there is no room. Here's 2 examples. US Soccer has scheduled a bunch of friendlies in 2018 against relatively notable teams. England, Italy, Brazil, Portugal at the end of 2017, Colombia, so on, so forth. Real teams, real challenges. The ones that were on US soil, many of them had high ticket prices for what amounts to a meaningless friendly. And it's meaningless because there's no plan in place. So it's not like you're supporting the team that's got a manager in place that says, we're going to learn this tactical style. We're going to put it into place. We're going to play against good competition. Instead, you've got Dave Sarachan, and no fault of his. He's just doing his job. Hey, Dave, can you call in some youngsters and cap time, please? Thanks. So you schedule these big friendlies against big teams, meaningless friendlies, big teams, but you do it so that the opposition's team's fans that live in the U.S. will buy up the tickets at those higher prices and generate revenue for U.S. soccer, instead of saying, listen, we're sorry, we've really screwed up. Here are some lower ticket prices. And by the way, we're going to connect with local youth soccer organizations in the local area of where that stadium is, that friendly is played. And we're going to give away free tickets to those kids so that at least the stadiums that we're playing in aren't half empty, because every single one of them was at least half empty. And the half that isn't empty won't just be colored in opposition colors, right? The Colombia game was majority yellow in the crowd, because Columbia fans bought those tickets because, well, if I don't have to travel to Columbia and I can see them on down the street, I'm going to do that. So instead of enabling the next generation or bringing other kids in and it's not going to cost you that much more from a stadium management standpoint to give away 10,000 tickets to kids. But imagine the impact if you gave away tickets to 10,000 kids and they saw really interesting football on display. Okay, another example. They've not apologized for any of this, so they must think it is normal. It would be small but meaningful to have said at Gregg Berhalter's announcement press conference thing, listen, this took longer than anyone would have liked. We should have communicated better. We're sorry. Here's what we're doing moving forward. But they've essentially not done that. They've not done that. They've just gone about and they send their marketing emails and say, hey, it's this happened to me, I think yesterday. It's fan week. Here's 10% off, U.S. soccer jerseys that are $150 or $160 or $170. Here's a $15 to $17 discount. Please buy our merchandise. So we've wasted a year of a 4.5 year cycle. That's about 22% of the time if you're generous and say it's another half year rather than another 5 months. But let's just 4.5 years, 1 year, 12 months out of 4.5 years is 22% of the time towards the 2022 World Cup. And you've used that year doing nothing. You could argue, well, there's still 3.5 years. That's a long time to get a team, ready for the World Cup. But you ignore the fact that qualification doesn't start at the end of the 4.5 years. It starts well before that. And there are so few international breaks that every single one of them is critical to building team cohesion around a specific style of play. The USMNT have played 12 games since Bruce resigned. They've played 6 games since the end of the World Cup. If you were going to say, hey, hire somebody for the World Cup, do a search, blah, blah, blah. You've still missed 6 games, but you've missed 12 since Bruce resigned. You never get those games back. And you've thrown away those games for an MLS coach that we could have hired a year ago if there was a plan in place. And what's tragic in all of this is that Gregg Berhalter is a fine hire. He's not amazing. He's not. It's not like they hired Lopetegui that said he was interested, or Pep Guardiola, or Jurgen. You're not hiring that level, because let's be honest, the USMNT head coaching gig isn't that attractive of a job. So he's not a huge surprise. Again, it was the worst kept secret in U.S. soccer. It's the expected hire. He's done okay with Columbus, especially this year with all the chaos with Save the Crew and whatever. But if you look back at the whole picture and you say, wow, the reaction to not qualifying for the 2018 World Cup was to hire an MLS coach with a 38.5% win percentage across his managerial experience in Sweden and MLS, whose brother conveniently is an executive at US Soccer. Oh, and it also took you 14 months to get to that point. Well, I hope you can understand why US Soccer fans aren't exactly enthused. And neither am I. Hit the like button. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Am I crazy? Do you agree? We'll see you next time. Hopefully with some better news about the USMNT. I'm not holding on to much hope.